Please pray with me. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations in each one of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, for you are our rock and you are our Redeemer. Amen. Happy Advent. This is not a greeting that we're used to saying, but I think it's good, at least when Christians are together, to acknowledge that it's not quite Christmas yet. It is Advent, that season that precedes Christmas, that time of preparation for the miracle of incarnation. Traditionally, Advent is a time of introspection and self-reflection. It used to be known as a little Lent, a reference to that season that precedes Easter. I'm under no illusions that modern Christians, in this country at least, hold off on Christmas until December 24th, as we used to. Christmas bleeds into Advent. And in my household, at least, we already have Christmas songs playing on Alexa, and if the rain holds off, we'll be getting our tree tonight. It can be a bit jarring in this Christmassy time to hear the texts that we just heard. We're collectively starting to try to get into the Christmas spirit, and here we are at the end of Jesus' life, hearing a message about a time that he will come again. I thought we were supposed to be thinking about Jesus coming as a baby. Why are we hearing about this mysterious second coming? This passage that I just read, that we read together, seems designed to make us a little nervous and a little anxious, turning a potentially joyous occasion, this mysterious return of Jesus, hearing about it as we're preparing for Christmas, into a disquieting fear. Wait a second, is Jesus telling us right now that we can't ever let down our guards in this life, that we have to keep our spiritual houses perpetually clean, as it were, in case Jesus comes to our homes and to our hearts, to this world in flesh and blood, and we're not ready? We're never, ever going to be able to measure up, to keep the kind of vigilance that we would keep, say, if somebody really important was coming. We can keep it up for a day, or for a week, or for a year even. But we've been trying to keep it up for 2,000 years. And the vision that Jesus shared with his disciples about how he would come again hasn't happened. And so what are we supposed to do in this time and place, at this Advent, with this text? Press pause right there. For an Advent theme this year, I have chosen the phrase, peace is possible. Just say that out loud. Peace is possible. If nothing else happens to you in this worship service or over the course of Advent, I want you to just walk away with that phrase as a phrase that you have in your back pocket. I started thinking about this because I wanted a sign to put by the side of the road. We need to take down the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee sign, and we have a chance to put up a new sign. And for months I've been thinking, what would I want to put on the sign? I've asked a lot of people. I've gotten a lot of good suggestions. But I've had in mind this message that I read on a sign of a local neighboring Lutheran church named Hope. For years, their sign said, "Fear paralyzes, hope mobilizes." And every time I drove past that, I felt like I had encountered a little bit of the gospel. I was always afraid of something, and I was always turned toward hope in reading that. And I thought, I would like for a season for our sign to do that, so that as people drive by our church, they read something that isn't a commandment, join us or worship now, and isn't just some information, here's our website, although we'll do that too, but instead actually proclaimed something about what we believe about the world in a way that anybody, Christian or not, could read and gain something from. And I kept coming back to this phrase, peace is possible. Maybe it's because I have been hearing for so long that there is deep conflict that we just can't get out of, and that every time I turn on the news, which is fairly rare, I see signs of violence and warfare, of so much illness and disease on every level. It seems like the opposite of peace is what I see and hear all around. And yet we worship the Prince of Peace, the one who came to give peace, the one who the angels sang about peace. And I thought, what if the message we proclaim to the world was that one? That peace actually is possible. How would that change people who drive by our church, and how would it change us if we started to live that way? The phrase peace is possible, I didn't know was kind of a big phrase out there. I Googled it at one point in this search for a sign, and I found out there's all sorts of groups called Peace is Possible, and there's this whole movement, this whole pacifist movement called Peace is Possible. That phrase was first spoken to me by a friend in a time of my life when I was in some romantic upheaval. I was trying to figure out if I should stay dating the person that I was dating at the time. He was a really nice guy, and we had a lot in common, and he checked all the boxes of kindness and respectability and even a faith connection. But for some reason, I couldn't quite convince myself that we should end up together. And note to anyone who's listening, if you have to convince yourself that you should end up together, probably you shouldn't end up together. But I was afraid of being alone, and my biological clock was ticking, and so I tried to shoehorn myself into this relationship that worked well on paper, but less well in person. And on the one hand, it might seem like kind of a trite example for your pastor to talk about her dating life in a sermon, but it's not. If you are somebody who is wondering about your romantic life, who feels lonely, who is in a relationship that isn't working, it is tough stuff. And I guarantee that someone listening to this sermon in person or online is going through something in their personal romantic life that's hard. It's just the nature of it, and we actually don't talk about it all that often in church. So many people are trying to figure out what it means to be in a relationship with someone, and wanting and waiting and watching and hoping that someone lines up. Well, here I was 15 or so years ago wondering what to do with that relationship, and this friend just said to me in passing, "Oh, peace is possible. You'll figure it out." And it struck me, oh, at some point I won't have to shoehorn myself in or out of this relationship. I will come to a place of peace about it. And in fact, I did. And we are not together anymore. And that's real nice, because one of the ways that I needed to prepare myself for the goodness that God was going to bring into my world was to unhook myself from a relationship that wasn't doing that. It was part of the active watching and waiting for God to act. And it kind of worked out. I didn't need to force anything one way or another, but to let go of what wasn't giving me peace. And this phrase, peace is possible, means so much more than only peace at a kind of global, international way, although we're actually going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. But today I want to focus on this idea that peace is possible in your life, with yourself, with the relationships that you're struggling in, with a piece of yourself that you have a conflict with somebody that you can't figure out how to forgive, or with something within yourself that desperately needs healing or hope, and you can't quite figure out how that's going to happen. Peace is possible for you. As we look toward Advent and the promise of Jesus coming, part of what we read in this gospel text, the one that we pressed pause on a minute ago, is not just that there is this kind of anxiety that Jesus might come into your life at any time and you better clean under the bed. No, it's this promise that into the mundane parts of your very life, eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage, preparing your food, living your life, God can actually show up and bless those moments and be a part of those moments and change your life somehow and make a difference somehow. As the poet Maria Rainier Rilke put it, live the questions and someday you will live into the answers. I think that's an echo of what Jesus says here in this gospel, which is, you have far more questions than you possibly have answers. There's all these things that Jesus doesn't answer in the gospel, and he just straight up says, you are not going to know the time or the place where I'm coming. Side note, it's amazing how many people have read that and thought, I should predict the time and the place when Jesus is coming. Instead, I think what Jesus is asking us to do is to make peace with time and to trust that in time and through time, God acts in times and in ways and in a manner that we would never expect or anticipate or plan for ourselves, but in a way that is trustworthy. So that our watchfulness and our wakefulness in this time of Advent becomes a kind of peaceful hope that admits there's a lot that we don't know about how God works in the whole world and in our lives, but trusts that in the midst of all that we don't know, God is active and coming. Today we will baptize Graham Parker. We have no idea how his life will roll out. What will this world even be in 50 years or 80? It's amazing to think of. And he will not even remember his own baptism. And yet today, in this moment, God will show up through this water and through these words and through this community, and it will change his life. And he will be part of this collective stream that, yes, harkens back even to Noah and harkens forward in this river that we don't know what happens, and yet he will be a part of it, a part of our future, a part of the future that God will give. On his baptism, on this day, the day that we watch and wait for the Lord to come, we can have peace that even in this moment, God is present and that God's peace is possible. Amen.